Skipping Christmas by John Grisham. Chapter 1. The gate was packed with weary travelers, most of them standing and huddled along the walls because the meager allotment of plastic chairs had long since been taken. Every plane that came and went held at least 80 passengers, yet the gate had seats for only a few dozen. There seemed to be 1,000 waiting for the 7 p.m. flight to Miami. They were bundled up and heavily laden, and after fighting the traffic and the check-in and the mobs along the concourse, they were subdued as a whole. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving, one of the busiest days of the year for air travel, and as they jostled and got pushed farther into the gate, many asked themselves, not for the first time, why, exactly, they had chosen this day to fly. The reasons were varied and irrelevant at the moment. Some tried to smile, some tried to read, but the crush and the noise made it difficult. Others just stared at the floor and waited. Nearby, a skinny black Santa Claus clanged on an irksome bell and droned out holiday greetings. A small family approached, and when they saw the gate number and the mob, they stopped along the edge of the concourse and began their wait. The daughter was young and pretty. Her name was Blair, and she was obviously leaving. Her parents were not. The three gazed at the crowd, and they, too, at the moment, silently asked themselves why they had picked this day to travel. The tears were over, at least most of them. Blair was 23, fresh from graduate school with a handsome resume, but not ready for a career. A friend from college was in Africa with the Peace Corps, and this had inspired Blair to dedicate the next 2 years to helping others. Her assignment was eastern Peru, where she would teach primitive little children how to read. She would live in a lean-to with no plumbing, no electricity, no phone, and she was anxious to begin her journey. The flight would take her to Miami, then to Lima, then by bus for 3 days into the mountains into another century. For the first time in her young and sheltered life, Blair would spend Christmas away from home. Her mother clutched her hand and tried to be strong. The goodbyes had all been said. "Are you sure this is what you want?" had been asked for the 100th time. Luther, her father, studied the mob with a scowl on his face. What madness, he said to himself. He had dropped them at the curb, then driven miles to park in a satellite lot. A packed shuttle bus had delivered him back to departures, and from there he had elbowed his way with his wife and daughter down to this gate. He was sad that Blair was leaving, and he detested the swarming horde of people. He was in a foul mood. Things would get worse for Luther. The harried gate agents came to life, and the passengers inched forward. The first announcement was made, the one asking those who needed extra time and those in first class to come forward. The pushing and shoving rose to the next level. "I guess we'd better go," Luther said to his daughter, his only child. They hugged again and fought back the tears. Blair smiled and said, "This year will fly by. I'll be home next Christmas." Norah, her mother, bit her lip and nodded and kissed her once more. "Please be careful," she said, because she couldn't stop saying it. "I'll be fine." They released her and watched helplessly as she joined a long line and inched away from them, away from home and security and everything she'd known. And she handed over her boarding pass. As she did, Blair turned and smiled at them one last time. "Oh well," Luther said, "enough of this. She's going to be fine." Norah could think of nothing to say as she watched her daughter disappear. They turned and fell in with the foot traffic, one long crowded march down the concourse, past the Santa Claus with the irksome bell, past the tiny shops packed with people. It was raining when they left the terminal and found the line from the shuttle back to the satellite, and it was pouring when the shuttle sloshed its way through the lot and dropped them off 200 yards from their car. It cost Luther $7 to free himself and his car from the greed of the airport authority. When they were moving toward the city, Norah finally spoke. "Will she'll be okay?" she asked. He had heard that question so often that his response was an automatic grunt. "Sure." "Do you really think so?" "Sure." Whether he did or didn't, what did it matter at this point? She was gone. They couldn't stop her. He gripped the wheel with both hands and silently cursed the traffic slowing in front of him. He couldn't tell if his wife was crying or not. Luther wanted only to get home and dry off, sit by the fire and read a magazine. He was within 2 miles of home when she announced, "I need a few things from the grocery." "It's raining," he said. "I still need them." Can it wait?" "You can stay in the car. Just take a minute. Go to Chip's. It's open today." So he headed for Chip's, a place he despised not only for its outrageous prices and snooty staff, but also for its impossible location. It was still raining, of course, and she couldn't pick a Kroger where you could park and make a dash. No, she wanted Chip's, where you parked and hiked. Only sometimes you couldn't park at all. The lot was full, the fire lanes were packed. He searched in vain for 10 minutes before Norah said, "Just drop me at the curb." She was frustrated at his inability to find a suitable spot. He wheeled into a space near a burger joint and demanded, "Give me a list." "I'll go," she said, but only in feigned protest. Luther would hike through the rain, and they both knew it. "Give me a list." "Just white chocolate and a pound of pistachios," she said, relieved. "That's all?" "Yes, and make sure it's Logan's chocolate, 1 pound bar, and Lance Brothers pistachios." "And this couldn't wait?" "No, Luther, it cannot wait. I'm doing dessert tomorrow for for lunch tomorrow. If you don't want to go, then hush up and I'll go." He slammed the door. His third step was into a shallow pothole. Cold water soaked his right ankle and oozed down quickly into his shoe. He froze for a second and caught his breath, then stepped away on his toes, trying desperately to spot other puddles while dodging traffic. Chips believed in high prices and modest rent. It was on a side alley, not visible from anywhere really. Next to it was a wine shop run by a European of some strain who claimed to be French but was rumored to be Hungarian. His English was awful, but he heard the language of price gouging. Probably learned it from Chips next door. In fact, all the shops in the district, as it was known, strove to be discriminating, and every shop was full. Another Santa clanged away with the same bell outside the cheese shop. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer rattled from a high speaker above the sidewalk in front of Mother Earth, where the crunchy people were no doubt still wearing their sandals. Luther hated the store, refused to set foot inside. Norah bought organic herbs there, for what reason he'd never been certain. The old Mexican who owned the cigar store was happily stringing lights in his window, pipe stuck in the corner of his mouth, smoke drifting behind him, fake snow already sprayed on a fake tree. There was a chance of real snow later in the night. The shoppers wasted no time as they hustled in and out of stores. The sock on Luther's right foot was now frozen to his ankle. There were no shopping baskets near the checkout at Chips, and of course this was a bad sign. Luther needed one, but it meant the place was packed. The aisles were narrow, and the inventory was laid out in such a way that nothing made sense. Regardless of what was on your list, you had to crisscross the place a half-dozen times to finish up. A stock boy was working hard on a display of Christmas chocolates. A sign by the butcher demanded that all good customers order the Christmas turkeys immediately. New Christmas wines were in, and Christmas hams. What a waste, Luther thought to himself. Why do we eat so much and drink so much in celebration of the birth of Christ? He found the pistachios near the bread. Odd how that made sense at Chips. The white chocolate was nowhere near the baking section, so Luther cursed under his breath and trudged along the aisles, looking at everything. He got bumped by a shopping cart. No apology. No one noticed. "God rest ye merry gentlemen" was coming from above, and it, as if Luther was supposed to be comforted, might as well be Frosty the Snowman. 2 aisles over, next to a selection of rice from around the world, there was a shelf of baking chocolates. As he stepped closer, he recognized a 1-pound bar of Logan's. Another step closer, and it suddenly disappeared, snatched from his grasp by a harsh-looking woman who never saw him. The little space reserved for Logan's was empty, and in the next desperate moment, Luther saw not another speck of white chocolate. Lots of dark and medium chips and such, but nothing white. The express line was, of course, lower than the other two. Chips' outrageous prices forced its customers to buy in small quantities, but this had no effect whatsoever on the speed with which they came and went. Each item was lifted and inspected and manually entered into the register by an unpleasant cashier. Sacking was hit or miss, though around Christmas the sackers came to life with smiles and enthusiasm and astounding recall of customers' names. It was the tipping season, yet another unseemly aspect of Christmas that Luther loathed. $6 and change for a pound of pistachios. He shoved the eager young sacker away and for a second thought he might have to strike him to keep his precious pistachios out of another bag. He stuffed them into the pocket of his overcoat and quickly left the store. A crowd had stopped to watch the old Mexican decorate his cigar store window. He was plugging in little robots who trudged through the fake snow, and this delighted the crowd to no end. Luther was forced to move off the curb. In doing so, he stepped just left instead of right. His left foot sank into 5 inches of cold slush. He froze for a split second, sucking in lungfuls of cold air, cursing the old Mexican and his robots and his fans and the danged pistachios. He yanked his foot upward and slung dirty water on his pants leg, and standing at the curb with 2 frozen feet and the bell clanging away and "Santa Claus is coming to town" blaring from the loudspeaker and the sidewalk blocked by revelers, Luther began to hate Christmas. The water had seeped into his toes by the time he reached the car. "No white chocolate," he hissed at Norah as he crawled behind the wheel. She was wiping her eyes. "What is it now?" he demanded. "I just talked to Blair." "What? How? Is she all right?" "She called from the airplane. She's fine." Norah was biting her lip, trying to recover. Exactly how much does it cost to phone home from 30,000 feet? Luther wondered. He'd seen phones on planes. Any credit card'll do. Blair had one he'd given her, the type where the bills were sent to Mom and Dad. From a phone up there to a cell phone down here, probably at least $10. And for what? "I'm fine, Mom. Haven't seen you in almost an hour. We all love each other. We all miss each other. Gotta go, Mom." The engine was running through, though Luther didn't remember starting it. "You forgot the white chocolate?" Norah asked, fully recovered. "No, I didn't forget it. They didn't have any." "Did you ask Rex?" "Who's Rex?" "The butcher." No, Norah. For some reason I didn't think to ask the butcher if he had any white chocolate hidden among his chops and livers. She yanked the door handle with all the frustration she could muster. I have to have it. Thanks for nothing, and she was gone. I hope you step in frozen water, Luther grumbled to himself. He fumed and muttered other unpleasantries. He switched the heater vents to the floorboard to thaw his feet, then watched the large people come and go at the burger place. Traffic was stalled on the streets beyond. How nice it would be to avoid Christmas, he began to think. A snap of the fingers, and it's just January 2nd. No tree, no shopping, no meaningless gifts, no tipping, no clutter, and no wrappings. No traffic and crowds, no fruitcakes, no liquor and hams that no one needed. No Rudolph and Frosty, no office party, no wasted money. His list grew long. He huddled over the wheel, smiling now, waiting for heat down below, dreaming pleasantly of escape. She was back with a small brown sack, which she tossed behind him just carefully enough not to crack the chocolate while letting him know that she'd found it and he hadn't. Everybody knows you have to ask, she said sharply as she yanked at her shoulder harness. Odd way of marketing, Luther mused in reverse now. Hide it by the butcher. Make it scarce. Folks clamor for it. I'm sure they'll charge more if it's hidden. Oh, hush, Luther. Are your feet wet? No. Yours? No. Then why'd you ask? Just worried. Do you think she'll be all right? She's on an airplane. You just talk to her. I mean down there, in the jungle. Stop worrying, okay? The Peace Corps wouldn't send her into a dangerous place. It won't be the same. What? Christmas. It certainly will not, Luther almost said. Oddly, he was smiling as he worked his way through the traffic. Chapter 2. With his feet toasty and besocked with heavy wool, Luther fell fast asleep and woke up even faster. Norah was roaming. She was in the bathroom flushing and flipping lights, then she left for the kitchen where she fixed an herbal tea, then he heard her down the hall in Blair's room, no doubt staring at the walls and sniffling over where the years had gone. Then she was back in bed, rolling and jerking covers and trying her best to wake him. She wanted dialogue, a sounding board. She wanted Luther to assure her Blair was safe from the horrors of the Peruvian jungle. But Luther was frozen, not flinching at any joint, breathing as heavily as possible because if the dialogue began it would run for hours. He pretended to snore, and that settled her down. It was after 11 when she grew still. Luther was wild-eyed, and his feet were smoldering. When he was absolutely certain she was asleep, he eased from the bed, ripped off the heavy socks and tossed them into a corner, and tiptoed down the hall to the kitchen for a glass of water, then a pot of decaf. An hour later, he was in the basement office at his desk with files open, the computer humming, spreadsheets in the printer, and investigators searching for evidence. Luther was a tax accountant by trade, so his records were meticulous. The evidence piled up, and he forgot about sleep. A year earlier, the Luther Crank family had spent $6,100 on Christmas. $6,100. $6,100 on decorations, lights, flowers, a new Frosty, a Canadian spruce. $6,100 on hams, turkeys, pecans, cheese balls, and cookies no one ate. $6,100 on wines and liquors and cigars around the office. $6,100 on fruitcakes from the firemen and the rescue squad, and the calendars from the police association. $6,100 on Luther for a cashmere sweater he secretly loathed, and a sports jacket he'd worn twice, and an ostrich skin wallet that was quite expensive and quite ugly, and frankly, he didn't like the feel of. On Norah for a dress she wore to the company's Christmas dinner, and her own cashmere sweater, which had not been since she unwrapped it, and a designer scarf she loved, $6,100. On Blair, $6,100 for an overcoat, gloves, and boots, and a Walkman for her jogging, and of course the latest, slimmest cell phone on the market. $6,100 on lesser gifts for a select handful of distant relatives, most on Norah's side. $6,100 on Christmas cards from a stationer 3 doors down from Chips in the district, where all the prices were double. $6,100 for the party, an annual Christmas Eve bash at the Crank home. And what was left of it? Perhaps a useful item or two, but nothing much. $6,100. With great relish, Luther tallied the damage as if it had been inflicted by someone else. All evidence was coming neatly together and making a very strong case. He waffled a bit at the end, where he'd saved the charity numbers. Gifts to the church, to the toy drive, to the homeless shelter, and the food bank, but he raced through the benevolence and came right back to the awful conclusion. $6,100 for Christmas. 9% of my adjusted gross, he said in disbelief. $6,100, cash, all but $600, non-deductible. In his distress, he did something he rarely did. Luther reached for the bottle of cognac in his desk drawer and knocked back a few drinks. He slept from from 3 to 6 and roared to life during a shower. Norah wanted to fret over coffee and oatmeal, but Luther would have none of it. He read the paper, laughed at the comics, assured her twice that Blair was having a ball, then kissed her and raced away to the office, a man on a mission. The travel agency was in the atrium of Luther's building. He walked by it at least twice each day, seldom glancing at the window displays of the beaches and mountains and sailboats and pyramids. It was there for those lucky enough to travel. Luther had never stepped inside, never thought about it actually. Their vacation was 5 days at the beach in a friend's condo, and with his workload, they were lucky to get that. He stole away just after 10. He used the stairs so he wouldn't have to explain anything and darted through the door of Regency Travel. Biff was waiting for him. Biff had a large flower in her hair and a waxy bronze tan, and she looked as if she'd just dropped by the shop for a few hours between beaches. Her comely smile stopped Luther cold, and in her first words, left him flabbergasted. "You need a cruise," she said. "How'd you know?" he managed to mumble. Her hand was out, grabbing his, shaking it, leading him to her long desk where she placed him on one side while she perched herself on the other. Long bronze legs, Luther noted. Beach legs. "December is the best time of the year for a cruise," she began, and Luther was already sold. The brochures came in a torrent. She unfolded them across her desk under his dreamy eyes. "You work in the building?" she asked, easing near the issue of money. "Wiley and Beck, 6th floor," Luther said, without removing his eyes from the floating palaces, the endless beaches. "Bail bondsman?" she said. Luther flinched just a bit. "No, tax accountants." "Sorry," she said, kicking herself. The pale skin, the dark eye circles, the standard blue Oxford cloth buttoned down with a bad imitation prep school tie. She should have known better. Oh well. She reached for even glossier brochures. "Don't believe we get too many from your firm." "We don't do vacations very well. Lots of work. I like this one right here." Great choice. They settled on the Island Princess, a spanking new mammoth vessel with rooms for 3,000, 4 pools, 3 casinos, non-stop food, 8 stops in the Caribbean, and the list went on and on. Luther left with a stack of brochures and scurried back to his office 6 floors up. The ambush was carefully planned. First he worked late, which was certainly not unusual, but at any rate helped to set the stage for the evening. He got lucky with the weather because it was still dreary. Hard to get in the spirit of the season when the skies were damp and gray, and much easier to dream about 10 luxurious days in the sun. If Norah wasn't worrying about Blair, then he'd certainly get her started. He'd simply mention some dreadful piece of news about a new virus or perhaps a Colombian village massacre, and that would set her off. Keep her mind off the joys of Christmas. Won't be the same without Blair, will it? "Why don't we take a break this year? Go hide, go escape, indulge ourselves." Sure enough, Norah was off in the jungle. She hugged him and smiled and tried to hide the fact that she'd been crying. Her day had gone reasonably well. She'd survived the ladies' luncheon and spent 2 hours at the children's clinic, part of her grinding volunteer schedule. While she heated up the pasta, he sneaked a reggae CD into the stereo, but didn't push play. Timing was crucial. They chatted about Blair, and not long into the dinner, Norah kicked the door open. "It'll be so different this Christmas, won't it, Luther?" "Yes, it will," he said sadly, swallowing hard. "Nothing will be the same. For the first time in 23 years, she won't be here. It might even be depressing. Lots of depression at Christmas, you know." Luther quickly swallowed, and his fork grew still. "I'd love to just forget about it," she said, her words ebbing at the end. Luther flinched and cocked his good ear in her direction. "What is it?" she asked. "Well," he said dramatically, shoving his plate forward, "now that you mention it, there's something I want to discuss with you. Finish your pasta." "I'm finished," he announced, jumping to his feet. His briefcase was just a few steps away, and he attacked it. "Luther, what are you doing?" "Hang on." He stood across the table from her, papers in both hands. "Here's my idea," he said proudly, "and it's brilliant." "Why am I nervous?" He unfolded a spreadsheet and began pointing. "Here, my dear, is what we did last Christmas. $6,100 we spent on Christmas. $6,100. I heard you the first time. And precious little to show for it. The vast majority of it down the drain, wasted. And that, of course, does not include my time, your time, the traffic, stress, worrying, bickering, ill will, sleep loss, all the wonderful things that we pour into the holiday season. Where is this going?" "Thanks for asking." Luther dropped the spreadsheets and, quick as a magician, presented the Island Princess to his wife. Brochures covered the table. "Where's this going, my dear?" "It's going to the Caribbean. 10 days of total luxury on the Island Princess, the fanciest cruise ship in the world. The Bahamas, Jamaica, Grand Cayman. Whoops, wait a minute." Luther dashed into the den, hit the play button, waited for the first notes, adjusted the volume, then dashed back to the kitchen where Norah was inspecting a brochure. "What's that?" she asked. "Reggae, the stuff they listen to down there. Anyway, where was I?" "You were island hopping." "Right. Well, we'll snorkel on Grand Cayman, windsurf in Jamaica, lie on the beaches. 10 days, Norah. 10 fabulous days." "I'll have to lose some weight." "We'll both go on a diet. What do you say?" "What's the catch?" The catch is simple. We don't do Christmas. We save the money, spend it on ourselves for once. Not a dime on food we won't eat or clothes we won't wear or gifts no one needs. Not one red cent. It's a boycott, Norah. A complete boycott of Christmas. Sounds awful. No, it's wonderful, and it's just for 1 year. Let's take a break. Blair's not here. She'll be back next year, and we can jump back into the Christmas chaos, if that's what you want. Come on, Norah, please. We skip Christmas, save the money, and go splash in the Caribbean for 10 days. How much will it cost? $3,000. So we save money? Absolutely. When do we leave? High noon, Christmas Day. They stared at each other for a long time. The deal was closed in bed, with the television on but muted, with magazines scattered over the sheets, all unread, with brochures not far away on the night table. Luther was scanning a financial newspaper but seeing little. Norah had a paperback, but the pages weren't turning. The deal-breaker had been their charitable giving. She simply refused to forego it, or skip it, as Luther insisted on saying. She had reluctantly agreed to buy no gifts. She also wept at the thought of no tree, though Luther had mercilessly driven home the point that they yelled at each other every other Christmas when they decorated the dang thing, and no frosty on the roof, when every house on the street would have one, which brought up the issue of public ridicule. Wouldn't they be scorned for ignoring Christmas? So what? Luther had replied over and over. Their friends and neighbors might disapprove at first, but secretly they would burn with envy. 10 days in the Caribbean, Norah, he kept telling her. Their friends and neighbors won't be laughing when they're shoveling snow, will they? No jeers from the spectators when they're roasting in the sun and they're bloated on turkey and dressing. No smirks when we return and tanned and completely unafraid of going to the mailbox. Norah had seldom seen him so determined. He methodically killed all her arguments, one by one, until nothing was left but their charitable giving. You're going to let a lousy $600 stand between us and the Caribbean cruise? Luther asked with great sarcasm. No, you are, she replied coolly. And with that they went to their corners and tried to read. But after a tense, silent hour, Luther kicked off the sheets and yanked off the wool socks and said, All right, let's match last year's charitable gifts, but not a penny more. She flung her paper back and went for his neck. They embraced, kissed, then she reached for the brochures. Chapter 3. Though it was Luther's scheme, Norah was the first to be tested. The call came on Tuesday morning from a pricklish man she didn't much care for. His name was Abby, and he owned the Pumpkin Seed, a pompous little stationery store with a silly name and absurd prices. After the obligatory greeting, Abby came right to the point. Just a bit worried about your Christmas cards, Miss Crank, he said, trying to seem deeply concerned. Why are you worried? Norah asked. She did not like being hounded by a crabby shopkeeper who would barely speak to her the rest of the year. Oh, well, you always select the most beautiful cards, Mrs. Crank, and we need to order them now. He was bad at flattery. Every customer got the same line. According to Luther's audit, the Pumpkin Seed had collected $318 from the Cranks last Christmas for cards, and at the moment it did seem somewhat extravagant. Not a major expense, but what did they get from it? Luther flatly refused to help with the addressing and stamping, and he flew hot every time she asked if so-and-so should be added or deleted from their list, and he also refused to offer so much as a glance at any of the cards they received, and Norah had to admit to herself that there was a diminishing joy in getting them. So she stood straight and said, We are not ordering cards this year. She could almost hear Luther applauding. Do what? You heard me. May I ask why not? You certainly may not. To which Abby had no response. He stuttered something, then hung up, and for a moment Norah was filled with pride. She wavered, though, as she thought of the questions that would be raised. Her sister, their minister's wife, friends on the literacy board, her aunt in a retirement village, all would ask at some point, What happened to the Christmas cards? Lost in the mail. Ran out of time? No, she would tell them the truth. No Christmas for us this year. Blair's gone and we're taking a cruise. And if you miss the cards that much, then I'll send 2 next year. Rallying with a fresh cup of coffee, Norah asked herself how many of those on her list would even notice. She received a few dozen each year, a dwindling number, she admitted, and she kept no log of who bothered and who didn't. In the turmoil of Christmas, who really had time to fret over a card that didn't come? Which brought up another of Luther's favorite holiday gripes, the emergency stash. Norah kept an extra supply so she could respond immediately to an unexpected card. Every year they received 2 or 3 from total strangers and a few from folks who hadn't sent them before, and within 24 hours she'd dash off the Crank's holiday greetings in response. always with her standard handwritten note of good cheer and peace be with you. Of course it was foolish. She decided that she wouldn't miss the entire ritual of Christmas cards. She wouldn't miss the tedium of writing all those little messages and hand-addressing 100 or so envelopes and stamping them and mailing them and worrying about who she forgot. She wouldn't miss the bulk they added to the daily mail and the hastily opened envelopes and the standard greetings for people as hurried as herself. Freed of Christmas cards, Norah called Luther for a little propping. He was at his desk. She replayed the encounter with Abby. "That little worm," Luther mumbled. "Congratulations," he said when she finished. "It wasn't hard at all," she gushed. "Just think of all those beaches, dear, just waiting down there." "What have you eaten?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm still at 300 calories. Me too." When she hung up, Luther returned to the task at hand. He wasn't crunching numbers or grappling with the IRS regs as usual, but instead he was drafting a letter to his colleagues, his first Christmas letter. In it he was carefully and artfully explaining to the office why he would not be participating in the holiday rituals, and, in turn, he would appreciate if everyone else just left him alone. He would buy no gifts and would accept none. Thank you anyway. He would not attend the firm's black-tie Christmas dinner, nor would he be there for the drunken mess they called the office party. He didn't want the cognac and the ham that certain clients gave to all the big shots each year. He wasn't angry, and he would not yell humbug at anyone who offered him a Merry Christmas. He was simply skipping Christmas and taking a cruise instead. He spent most of the quiet morning on his letter and typed it himself. He would place a copy on every desk at Wiley and Beck.